Light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome, I am Sister Who. When I do these shows, it is very much putting myself in the place of a servant of the work and recognizing that the work is greater than I am, and that the creative work that ultimately results knows things and understands things that are beyond my comprehension and beyond my awareness. When I speak to someone, I know only the smallest bit of information about them. Sometimes I will do readings using tarot cards or other symbolic systems of symbols, runes or what have you, but a lot of it for me comes through a sort of intuition, and a lot of that is about trusting whatever comes into my mind and speaking whatever comes into my mind. And sometimes it comes out very eloquently and sometimes it comes out very awkwardly. And so I usually tell people in those situations to hold on to whatever is helpful and let the rest go, because it may have been my best intentions and my best effort, but it clearly wasn't the best demonstration of my abilities. No matter how much we learn, no matter how far we go, no matter how much we develop or how much training we receive, it is not in the nature of humanity to ever be perfect. Even experts sometimes say the most stupid things. For those who interact with energies, attempting to sense the energy of a person and to serve that energy by channeling some sort of information, I would say that the majority, if not all of such people, make extensive use of their intuition. Something deep within me, deep within each of those practitioners, that guides their actions and words in that moment. Something that says this is what is needed, or a thought that pops into one's head for no apparent reason, and we have to decide in that moment whether to trust the guidance, whether to trust what our intuition has presented, or whether to subject it to an intellectual scrutiny that says, that doesn't make any sense, I shouldn't say that, that would be horribly rude to say to that person. And maybe in fact that's exactly what the person needs to hear, but we have no way of knowing that. And so it kind of becomes this struggle to trust. And so as the words come tumbling out, I have to forgive myself for occasionally being awkward or sometimes saying the wrong thing, and understand also that whoever watches any one of these episodes of my television show isn't going to remember 100% of what I say anyway. And so my hope is that somewhere in all my rambling, I will say enough different good things that God or the universe or intuition or whatever creative force you want to ascribe it to, that what I say can be used to help that person in that moment in ways that I might never envision. There was one time, for example, I was doing a tarot reading for someone, and I pulled out a card that is described as the Ten of Swords, and it was a figure laying face down on the ground with 10 swords inserted into the back of the person. Frequently that card is interpreted as something indicating great difficulty, possibly pain, all sorts of adversarial sorts of circumstances, as if someone has been attacked by 10 swords. The one particular time I was doing a reading with someone, as soon as my eyes saw the face of the card, the thought that flashed through my mind was acupuncture treatment, which would be a similar sort of appearance, but a very different interpretation, and one that was specifically healing and constructive in comparison. And apparently that was what that person needed to hear at that point in time, to think of the difficulties that he or she was enduring as a sort of acupuncture treatment, that there were things with sharp points that were being placed with precision into a life experience in order to ultimately have a healing effect. But in the moment of the acupuncture treatment, the only thing the person knows is to lie very, very still and to try to relax into the experience and not worry about the fact that needles are being inserted into their skin, which would, in some circumstances, be a very threatening, frightening kind of experience. There is a sense in which we need to trust the unfolding of life, that in the combination of good and bad things that comes to us, the difficult moments, the moments that really hurt, not to belittle those moments or disregard them or ignore them, but also not to wallow in them or grandstand them as if that was the definition of the whole experience, when, instead of just being a moment within a larger experience. There's a sense in which we need to pay attention and respect them, but there's also a sense in which that moment, painful or otherwise, is simply a component of a larger complex experience. And so when I'm describing metaphors and symbols and different intuitions pop into my head, or a thought comes to me from I'm not sure where, and as much as possible I strive to trust it and to speak it as clearly and as wisely as possible, so that what I say can be a source of peace and growth and inspiration to whoever hears what I say. On a similar but not identical note, somebody expanded on a common saying once for me, and I thought it was a really good addition. I've often heard the phrase, say what you mean and mean what you say, which for an autistic person especially is wonderful, because autistics frequently have problems with duplicity, where the words and the meanings aren't the same and aren't really congruous. But you would know that from a broader perspective, but in the moment it's not terribly obvious. When someone uses the expression, for example, that something was so funny I was tickled to death, it didn't mean that they were in mortal danger. It meant that they found it extremely amusing. But if you interpret the words literally, they point in a very different direction. And so sometimes for autistics, those sorts of expressions can be very difficult to pick up. In a similar sort of way, when I'm attempting to offer companionship, counseling, some sort of alternative perspective to people going through various struggles, I encourage them to hold on to whatever feels helpful and let the rest go. If it's meant to be helpful at a later time, then your guardian angel or spirit or God or whatever you want to call it, or your own memory will, your subconscious mind perhaps, will bring it back to your memory at the time it is needed and helpful. And until then, you don't need to worry about it or hang on to it. Perhaps it was for somebody else. Perhaps it was me responding to the energy of some other person in the vicinity. There have been times where I'm talking to someone at a large event where there's many, many people around, and trying to focus on them, but occasionally sensing people with really powerfully disturbed energy walking by right behind me. And sometimes that can be very distracting. In much the same way as talking to someone and suddenly a woman walks behind you, or a man with cologne, a woman with perfume, or a man with cologne, and there's so much of it that the smell for momentarily dominates all the smells. And maybe the other person wasn't even aware of it, but because the person walked right behind me, I suddenly noticed this overbearing cologne smell, or this really powerful perfume smell. And I kind of lose my train of thought and look like, where did that smell come from? And who was wearing that cologne? It's a similar sort of thing on an energetic level, that if somebody is experiencing really strong emotion, they, kind of like a cologne or a perfume, it reverberates around them. And so there are times, if I'm going through really strong emotions, that I actually choose to withdraw into sort of a personal retreat sort of mode, because I don't want to impose that kind of energy on those around me. It's something that I need to come to terms with in a particular way, and sometimes I will ask for help, but I will not put myself in situations where it's just kind of out there imposing on everyone else who may not be interested in having anything to do with it. It would be nice to know that there was a support team, a village, a community around me who is so concerned about me that they would want to know when I feel that way so that they could immediately come to my aid. But sometimes there's not anything that anyone else can do. And sometimes the best I can do is simply give a reflection or an intuition or a statement. And whether someone finds it helpful or not is up for them to decide. It's just because I intended it well doesn't mean it was helpful. Just because I've had years of experience doing spiritual counseling doesn't mean that all the spiritual counsel I ever give is always right on track. I do my best, but I am a human being, and as such I am a combination of so many different qualities and variables and strengths and weaknesses that I don't know exactly how it's going to mesh in any particular moment. And similarly, for the person to whom I'm speaking, there are times when they're able to listen, and when they're able to hear, and when they are open to new information, and other times where they are dealing with so much difficulty and struggle and distraction and some sort of adversarial circumstance coming at them out of the blue, that they don't have the ability to listen the way they might want to. They don't have the ability to hear everything they need to hear. That's why I tell some people sometimes, I understand the whole thought process of, difficult moments come and, gee, what did we learn from this? And I always tell them, don't ever say that to me while I'm still in the moment, because I swear I will turn around and slap you. Because it is not the moment where I'm able to receive that. It may be that every negative experience that I ever go through has some lesson to teach. But in the moment of the experience, my focus needs to be upon surviving the experience, not asking what it could mean or how it could give insight to the rest of my life. When there's a flood, it's about getting yourself into a boat. It's about not drowning. And afterwards we can talk about what did the flood mean and how much did I lose, how much did I save, was I too naive and not prepared for possible disasters. I mean, there's all sorts of different lessons that could come out. But those need to happen in the reflection on the experience afterward, not in the middle of the experience when I'm just up to my eyeballs in challenges trying to cope with it. And so, and there's something very almost condescending, very arrogant and almost snobbish about coming to someone who's experiencing difficulty and inviting them to suddenly become very detached from their experience and address it in a very intellectual fashion. In the experience, as a human being, we have emotions, we have thoughts, we have memories, we have past experiences that a present experience brings to mind. And for a moment we might wonder what the past experience and the present experience have in common. But we can't think about it too much in the experience because we're trying to deal with the circumstance. It may be that I'm crossing the street, just as a hypothetical example, I'm crossing the street and a particular car is coming barreling toward me at this dangerous speed. And the immediate response needs to be get out of the way of the car so that you're not hit and injured. The momentary distraction in that moment might be that it's a particular color, make, and model of car, similar to that driven by a friend whom I haven't seen in a very, very long time. So I see this car coming at me, and the first thing I think is not jump, run, get out of the way, but rather, oh my goodness, that looks just like Stanley's car or Susan's car or whoever it was that I knew in the past. And it kind of like on a lighter note, there was a scene in the Muppet movie where Kermit says to Fozzie the Bear, "Look at that car coming toward us." And Fozzie says, or Kermit says, "Look at that car." And Fozzie says, "Yeah, cute, isn't it?" And Kermit says, "Yes, but it's coming right toward us." And so suddenly they have to swerve at the last minute, supposedly. But sometimes we look at things and our mind goes to creating associations instead of directing reactions. In the moment, we need to focus on the reaction for purposes of safety and reestablishing balance. The instruction of the moment is something we deal with in reflection afterwards, not at the time. So there's a sense in which, in that moment, someone may want to say, okay, what is the lesson in this? In that moment, I may need to let that go for now and not think about it, because I need to focus instead on how do I respond. What do I do about this so that it doesn't create a larger, more injurious problem? In doing these TV shows, I say a lot of different things, and I'm aware that my perspective would probably be classified by some as more liberal, more creative, more out of the box, more unconventional. And of course, anytime someone says out of the box, I usually look around and say, box? What box? I don't remember any box. I don't know that the common categories have ever really been part of my life, because my brain has never worked that way. And so in order to make sense of things at all, I have to find my own way to do it. Going all the way back to kindergarten, I remember at the end of my experience of kindergarten, the only comment my kindergarten teacher, and I still remember her name actually, the only comment she wrote on my report card is that, quote, "He always wants to do it his own way." And I kind of giggled about that later, because the implication seemed to be that it was a criticism, that it was a negative comment. And I more often have found it extremely helpful, and almost as if she was, in a backward sort of way, validating my creativity. As an autistic person, now that I understand myself as having autism, because I was diagnosed well into adulthood, they never detected it as a child. But of course, when I was a child, they didn't really have an understanding of high-functioning autism. The only autism that was recognized was low-functioning. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a lot going on inside the mind. It simply means that there is low functioning in terms of social skills and social interactions. But it's not a question of superior or inferior. It's just an objective description of what someone is able to do on a social level. Well, on a social level, I was kind of sort of higher, but nothing ever really matched up very well. So I never really had many friends, and a lot of things didn't make sense to me because I couldn't interpret duplicity very well. When people would say things they didn't mean, or mean things they didn't say, and I couldn't interpret what it was that they wanted from me. And suddenly I was being held accountable for an expectation that I don't recall ever understanding or being told. And in so many cases, the people would look at me and insist, well, you should have known. Well, there was no reason I should have known, because no one ever told me. It wasn't a conclusion that my reasoning processes were able to interpret. It wasn't something that made any sense to me because of the way my brain works. I was noticing details instead of vague generalities, and trying to bring these details into some sort of scheme where they made sense. And sometimes I could, and sometimes I couldn't. The challenge to me in that moment, as to everyone who's ever come to me for any kind of spiritual counseling, is to hold on to what's helpful and let the rest go. The world is a shared space, and consequently, because this show is going out to literally millions of people over the internet and through cable television, it becomes impossible to say which statement is right, because an individual viewer is a specific detail, not a vague generality. A person has a name and an experience, and the things that I say on the show will relate to that unique experience in particular ways, and not relate to that particular experience in other ways. So there may be some things I say that simply aren't relevant to a person with that experience. And so in one sense, I'm trying to be specific and convey specific understanding, but also to wrestle with the fact that the world I address through my TV shows is a collection of so many different examples of individuality that there is no single statement I could make that would be applied in the same way to every single one of them. Each person has to take whatever I say and adapt it to the specific circumstances of his or her own life. I do my best. I keep saying that, and it's as true the first time now as the first time I said it, but it's something that I hope other people will bear in mind as they listen to my show. And also to bear in mind that as a human being, I may occasionally say things that don't apply to them, that are not even true for them, but that are probably true for someone somewhere. If each viewer takes whatever is helpful and lets the rest go, figuring, okay, this part was for me and that part was for somebody else, I don't know who, but it was for somebody else. Somebody somewhere will find that helpful, but I don't. And that's okay, because the exact same sort of filtering or interpretation needs to happen between each viewer and every other person they meet. That as they speak to people about their experiences, their perspectives, their conclusions, their thought processes, some of the people to whom they speak will be inspired by particular phrases, and others to whom they speak will be inspired by other phrases. Nobody needs the same thing. How do I say this? So we say one thing to this person and a different thing to that person, and there may be a common thread behind it all, but it's a multifaceted, complex understanding. On my show, I've tried to address a wide range of different subjects. How to express love, how to deal with government, how to deal with formal educational situations, how to deal with college professors, some of whom are there because they want to occupy the position and think they're so wonderful and great, and they really aren't, and they really don't even know their subject, and they don't know how to teach. Other professors who are there because they have a passion for what they're trying to convey to their students. But in order to convey their information effectively, they have to get to know their students enough to know how that student hears and how they understand and what's going on in that student's life. Because if there's some major upheaval, well, at the younger ages, and maybe even at the college level, if someone's parents are going through a divorce, that's an earthquake in family relationships, and the topography of relationships is changing. And the person cannot come to class with all of that going on at home and be the same person as they would be if none of that was happening. And so from the teacher to the student, a certain understanding and compassion is highly recommendable. And from the student to the teacher, a certain understanding and compassion is highly recommendable, because the teacher also will be going through all sorts of experiences that will affect them emotionally and psychologically. And on some days they will say brilliant things that grant incredible insight. And on other days, somehow, in spite of their best efforts, everything will come out wrong. And that may be a backwards way of saying to the student, you're invited to be a supportive human in this moment. You are seeing a teacher who is struggling, a teacher who is in pain, a teacher who wants to serve students, but for this moment, due to conflicting variables of which you are not aware, they're not able to give their best. They're not able to do as well as they'd like to. You know, in the same way that a runner in an athletic race, if they have a bad cold, if they have some sort of bronchial affliction or something that affects their lungs, or sore muscles because of any number of things, cold temperatures, age, disease, whatever. Those are things that restrict our ability to perform, or our ability to do our best. And one of the challenging quirks of life, I guess, that I'll leave you with is that life doesn't allow us to always be at our best. But even when we're not at our best, we have to go on living. Even when we're doing the best we can and it's not quite enough, we have to go on doing the best that we can, because life doesn't stop and wait for us to get back to our peak ability again. Life keeps going on and keeps going on. And somehow, in the combination of life being this confusing, perplexing mess at times, and us trying to do our best, even though we're running into limitations and adversarial circumstances that don't allow for that, somehow in that combination, something is going to come out, and we're left with making the best of it. And in some ways that sounds very lame, but in other ways, as I look back on previous times in my life when that's happened, what was my best in that moment has often turned out to be more perfect for that moment than truly doing my best would have been.